Lupin III once said, "Strike your enemy like a hawk and run like the wind," which sounds more like a Goemon line, but I digress. It's a strategy that's appropriate to MTG, especially as applies to today's deck. Thief decks have been popular for decades, and when you look at popular culture, it's no surprise why. From Robin Hood to Aladdin to my first crush, Carmen Sandiego, to the best character in Final Fantasy I will die on this hill. Okay, Red Mage is the best character, but my point stands, sometimes we all love to cheer the villain or even assume the role of one. Perhaps it's because Wizards knows this, that they've made Red, Black, Steel, and Sack a buildable deck in just about every standard for at least 10 years now. This time around, however, the deck has pieces it could only dream of in years past, and in a lot of ways, I think this deck is as strong as it's ever been. So let's take a look at a troll deck that embodies the heart of the rogue, Red, Black, Steel, and Sack. What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're being jerks, luring our opponent's creatures over to our side with promises of candy and good dental, and then stabbing them in the back for our own nefarious needs. It's a deck that's been popular forever, and I think that kind of says something about the state of humanity, but even I, the spread love and be kind guy, can't resist taking this deck for a test drive every few years. And this time around, it's got the best pieces it's ever had. Now, a big reason for that is Angrath the Flame Chain. You know, this poor guy has not seen too much play in Standard up to now, so you might think this card is bull, but it does everything the deck wants, you know. And then some, actually. It actually allows the deck to do some things that it doesn't normally get to do, like play well against control because of that plus ability. But obviously the major attraction here is the second ability. -3 lets us steal whatever creature we want, and if it's small enough, we just naturally sacrifice it into turn anyway. That's awesome. Against Jadelight Ranger, Banalish Marshal, Danto Vanguard, all kinds of good stuff right now. But obviously in this deck, it doesn't matter what we steal, we can sacrifice it. So we can just steal like Lyra Dawnbringers, Doom Whisperers, Galtas, whatever, huge guys, and then sack them away because of this ability. And we can do it for effectively free if we untap with Angrath on our side of the battlefield. That leaves all of our mana open to do whatever tricks we want to. So with that in mind, Angrath is just maybe the best card this deck has ever seen. But I love the ultimate too, because it's like a way to double punish your opponent. You know, we've been stealing creatures from them, sacrificing them all game, and they end back up in our opponent's graveyard. Well, once we actually get to the ultimate, we can hit them for whatever creatures we've sacrificed, plus whatever cards they've naturally put into their graveyard themselves. So it's like a win condition in this deck, which is something else that the deck needed. Just Angrath is the total package, man. He's like Lex Luger, and I'm 30 plus years old, so I'm probably the only one that gets that, but that probably wasn't the best joke to end on. But just know that Angrath does everything the deck had ever wanted to do. And that's why I'm playing 4. 4 might look like one too many for the main deck, but honestly, you know, blue-white decks play 4 Teferi a lot of the time because that's the most important card in their entire deck, the best card in the whole list. And same thing's true of Angrath here. I always want to see Angrath, and very often I want to see multiple copies of Angrath in a game, so I'm playing the whole playset. I'm also playing the full complement of Captivating Crew here. This is another dream piece for the deck, you know. It is much better to have this ability on the board and able to repeat it over and over for as many times as you have the mana, or as many turns as it stays out. That is way better than just having like a spell that does this. Being able to repeat this ability is absolutely insane, and despite the mana investment, it's exactly what the deck wants to be doing, so I don't think we want to play any less than the 4 of. Even though it probably sounded like I was bagging on Thief Spells a little bit back there just a second ago, I'm still going to make room for a couple of copies of Act of Treason in here just because it would feel wrong to not have it, you know. And this gives us 10 total pieces that allow us to steal opponents' creatures, which is more than enough. It also helps that Act is actually, in some ways, the cheapest way to steal a creature in the deck. You know, it's only 3 mana, whereas Captivating Crew is like an 8 mana investment to actually start stealing creatures. Angrath costs 5 to get onto the board in the first place. So sometimes Act of Treason is actually the best card for the job. If you want to steal a guy starting on turn 4 and sacrifice him, Act of Treason is usually your best bet. Now, this deck might have some of the best like Thief cards that it's had in a really long time or even ever, but that's only one half of the equation. We also need to play Sacrifice Outlets in this deck, but there's good news on that front too. You know, Standard has a wide and diverse array of different Sacrifice Outlets to choose from, but there's one thing in particular that makes some of our Sacrifice Outlets so good. Secret tech here, most of our Sac Outlets don't actually require that we sacrifice a creature in order to get some kind of value or mileage out of them. Like Vicious Offering, for instance. We're going to play 4 copies of this because we don't have to sacrifice creature 1 in order to actually make this a playable card. It'll kill a Danto Vanguard in the early game, and there's a lot to be said just for that. piece of tech, but it kills a bunch of other early game creatures too, and if we can sacrifice a creature, you know, it doesn't even matter if it's one of our creatures. You know, we can take out a Lyra Dawnbringer or anything on, you know, on down from that on the toughness scale. And this is a huge blowout. If we can manage to steal one of their creatures and sacrifice it to Vicious Offering, take out two of their guys at the same time, usually their two best creatures, that's a huge blowout that just completely reverses the tide of the game, and it's actually not that expensive to make happen. We're also playing 4 copies of Dark Dweller Oracles. DDO is awesome in this deck for a few reasons. You know, one, it's a cheap sacrifice outlet. I want to play a few sack outlets that only cost like 1 mana to sack a creature so that we can steal and then sack creatures as early as possible. You know, free and cheap sack outlets are a little bit harder to come by in the standard than I'd really want for a deck like this, but Dark Dweller Oracle is one of the better options, not only because it's so cheap to sack a creature, but if you have extra mana, you can get more card advantage out of it, which is really what a deck like this wants. But it's also a cheap creature we can play early in the game and then sacrifice to Vicious Offering or any of our other sack outlets pretty guilt-free. It's really important that the deck have bodies. So all that said, it's good when our sacrifice outlet is in and of itself a cheap body. Now, I'm also working in 2 copies of Makeshift Munitions here in the 2-drop slot. Still a cheap sacrifice outlet, we need those, but it's not quite as good in multiples as a creature like Dark Dweller Oracles is. You know, we can't sacrifice it to sacrifice outlets and stuff like that. We can't attack or block with it, but for what it's worth, it is a lot harder to remove than a creature, and in the late game, it can lead to some real damage output and some crazy swingy plays. You know, steal that guy with Angrath, steal that guy with Captivating Crew, sacrifice them both to Makeshift Munitions. It's a ridiculous play, and if you have enough mana in the late game, you can actually make it work, and it's a ridiculously swingy play. So I want at least a couple of copies of Makeshift Munitions, but I really don't want to see more than 1 copy in just about any given game. So I think 2's right. Now, I'm also running 2 copies of Costly Plunder here. Now, just like Makeshift Munitions, I didn't mention this about munitions, but it is a real consideration. This forces us to have a creature to sacrifice to get any value out of it. I don't necessarily like that, and I want to keep those cards to a minimum, but that said, this is still a great source of card advantage for the deck. Sometimes we can even sacrifice one of our creatures and be totally fine with drawing a couple of cards, obviously, but when we get one of their creatures and sacrifice it to a Costly Plunder, that is insane card advantage, and it's exactly the refill that the deck needs in the mid to late game turn. So we'll run a couple of copies of this, even if I am a little bit wary of it, but when it's useful, it's one of the better cards in the entire deck. Now, I'll pause on the sacrifice outlets for just a second to show you that we're also playing 4 copies of Doomed to Sinner, because it's the last 2-drop in the deck, and I think it's the best one. There are other plays you could make here. I like the idea of Dusk Legion Zealot. Drawing card is really important. And I could also see a Goblin Instigator here to give you a couple of creatures, help you block a little bit better, and give you more creatures to sacrifice. All of those ideas seem good, but Doomed to Sinner is my favorite of the bunch. It always leaves behind a better creature than you started with. Blocks well, even if you don't mean to sacrifice it to something. But if you are sacking this to a Vicious Offering, it makes Vicious Offering unbelievable. So I think Doomed to Sinner is the best 2-drop you could play if you're looking for sacrifice fodder, but there's definitely arguments for other cards. But back to the sack, because we're playing... That sounds terrible. Anyway, we're playing 4 copies of Plaguecrafter in the deck as well. And one thing I like about this, just like Vicious Offering and Dark Dwellers and stuff, is that this card can be used, even if we don't intend to sacrifice another creature. You know, this can just be played as basically a sorcery speed. You sacrifice a thing or discard a card or whatever. So I like that about it a lot, and sometimes it can be really important. You know, it can get rid of Carnage Tyrants and Vine Mares and stuff like that. If you're able to steal like all of their other creatures or kill all of their other creatures some way or another, but you can't take out their Carnage Tyrant, this can be a great way of doing just that. So Plaguecrafter is awesome in this format in lots of decks. So in a deck that's looking to sacrifice stuff specifically, then Plaguecrafter is, again, just one of the best cards the deck could ever hope to play. So yeah, all 4 copies of this. But I'm dropping in 1 copy of Squee here in the 3-drop slot. I'm that guy. This allows us to do a few things. It's obviously like the perfect creature to sacrifice. We just play it over and over. And it's like we never really had to sacrifice anything at all. So that's pretty sweet. It also gives us a little bit of play against control, you know, unless the Ixalan's binding it. There's really nothing they can do to completely remove this forever. I mean, there is the 1 card, but that is it. That is it, Chip. So I really like Squee for that purpose, but there's also the fact that, like, again, just crazy good sacrifice fodder, you know, sacrifice this to Vicious Offering, or in the late game, you can get into loops, you know, get an extra card every turn with Oracle, or you can get an extra damage or 2 every turn, whatever you have the mana for, with Makeshift Munitions. So sometimes if you're just looking for a way to close the game out late and you have enough turns, Squee can be a way to do just that. So I at least want to play the 1, but I really don't think I want to play any more. We obviously don't want to see more than one copy of Squee in any game because it really it doesn't matter that much. So I'm just going to resign ourselves to one copy, but this does so many cool tricks for the deck that I think we have to play it. But also just had to make some room here. There's a lot of cards you just got to make some room for in this deck, but one of them is definitely Demon of Catastrophes. We're going to play 2 copies of this. Like, I don't want to go too crazy on it. You're not going to always have a creature to sacrifice to this, but it's obviously super sweet if we go like Angrath, and then we can untap with that Angrath on the next turn, you know. Still one of their dudes, Demon of Catastrophes. We just took the best creature off their side of the board, killed it, and got a 6/6 of our own for just 4 mana. We have more mana to spend that turn if we want to. So it's just a ridiculous card, and even if it comes down on turn 4 and we sacrifice an Oracle or, you know, a Doom Dissenter is really good, obviously. Then, yeah, this card is just crazy, you know, best body in the deck by far, can go toe-to-toe with Doom Whisperer, you know, so I like a lot about having a 6/6 flample body in the deck, you know, especially for just 4 mana. The deck's looking to sacrifice stuff anyway. We've got creatures of our own we don't mind sacking, and obviously, again, if we can steal one of their dudes with an Angrath or a Captivating Crew and still have the mana to play Demon of Catastrophes, that's just something else that can swing the game entirely in just one play. So Demon is just crazy. We got to play at least a couple of copies. We'll close things out here with 2 copies of Banefire. It looks a little bit out of place, right? But game 1, this deck has so many issues against control. I mean, they don't really present us with too many targets to steal. Like, our whole strategy is kind of null and void against them some of the time, you know? So we have to have main deck tools to be able to actually win that matchup. Angrath is not a bad tool. Plaguecrafter is sometimes not bad either for getting rid of those Teferis and stuff. We've got some stuff in this deck. You know, we got some solid bodies to attack in, but control is a really difficult matchup for us, so I want to play a couple of copies of Banefire to just blow them away in the very, very late game. So, I feel like that's excusable. In the meantime, if we're not playing against control, we can just use this as a removal. It's another removal piece. Why not do that? So I just think there's really not much opportunity cost to playing Banefire in the main deck. And since control is such an issue game 1, I like to have a card like this, just kind of an ace in the hole against them. That still has use against other decks. Here's the mana base here. Pretty simple breakdown. There's 25, 17 black sources, 16 red sources. Plenty of both color to do whatever you're trying to do. But this mana base will get even better in just a couple of months. January 25th, Allegiance comes out, and suddenly we'll have Blood Crypt. So keep that in mind. But for the time being, perfectly serviceable mana base. We're not doing too much on turn 1 anyway in this deck, so we don't mind playing Cinder Barons. Like at all. So pretty easy mana base to put together here, but it's going to get even better in a couple of months' time. Now here's our sideboard right here. Don't worry, I'll get to the weird looking card in just a second, but most of this is to fight control decks. We've got Duress in there. We've got Direfleet Daredevil to recast their spells. That's very good against control. We also get a body out of the deal. That's pretty sweet. We got the Eldest Reborn in there. Make some discard cards, sacrifice to Fairy, and then we get something back. I mean, it's everything that's good against control. We've also got another Banefire. Just, you know, because why not? Third copy of Banefire, the card is ridiculous against control, and we often have to cast more than one copy of this in a given game to actually win. So I want to play up to 3. But the rest is Golden Demise. This is a concession against aggro decks and tokens decks. They can be really good against us because usually we want to steal big stuff, juicy stuff, and that requires playing against mid-range decks. Aggro decks will present us with a bunch of targets that don't really have a whole lot of value individually, you know, and they can just go wide on us, and that is not what we necessarily want. So Golden Demise can be a great card against those decks. You could also play Ritual of Soot, but I've gone Demise here. I'll leave that choice up to you. Now the other card in the sideboard is Never Happen. This looks very bad, but I've been wanting to try it out a little bit because it works, as a matter of fact, against certain decks. This is good against control decks. This will help get counter spells out of their hand, Teferis out of their hand, and other big cards that you just don't want them to have before they can ever cast them, especially if you're on the play. This also works against Carnage Tyrant, which is a very, very good card against us, despite the fact that we have Plaguecrafter and the Eldest Reborn. This is another answer to Carnage Tyrant before they can ever even get to play it. Same thing with Rekindling Phoenix. That's kind of, we don't necessarily like seeing Rekindling Phoenix on the other side of the battlefield, so it's a good card against them too. Lyra Dawnbringer gets it out of their hand before they can ever cast it. Against Golgari and Arclight Phoenix decks, its ability to work from graveyards is really, really good as well. We want to have a little bit more game in games 2 and 3, and Never Happen is actually a good way to fill out the 3-drop slot that we don't really have too many cards in to begin with, and takes out and exiles forever a lot of cards that we would otherwise have a really seriously hard time dealing with. So give Never Happened a shot. There's other ways you could use this sideboard slot, but I tried it out and I have enjoyed my time with it thus far. Give it a shot. Now, before I get to the power rankings, there are a couple of other possibilities for this deck. There's so many good cards for this deck in Standard, but I only want to bring up a couple of here. First of all, you could try BBO, Brawl Bash Ogre, then you'd have DDO and PBO in the same deck. But Brawl Bash Ogre is actually one of the, it's kind of rare in the Standard format. It's one of the only ways we have of sacrificing a creature for free, which could actually be really, really good in this deck. And it's effectively a 4-mana 5/5 menace if you can sacrifice a thing to it. So that could probably be really good if you get the best creature off their side of the board, sacrifice it to Brawl Bash Ogre, and then swing for 5 minutes. That seems alright. There's other stuff you could do here, like there's a Thallid that you sacrifice creatures and you draw cards. There's Undercity Necrolis. There are a couple of things, but if I was going to do anything else, I would probably try out the old Saffron Olive Torgar Thud package, like both of these are at least decent for the deck. They allow us to sacrifice creatures and get some kind of value for doing that, but they both require us to sacrifice creatures. And I don't, like I said, I don't care for that, but Torgar is obviously crazy by itself, would be good in this deck as a 1 or 2 of, obviously. And Thud, doesn't seem bad either, another 1-mana play that allows us to sacrifice creatures. So steal their best guy, sacrifice it, kill their other best guy, or just hit him in the face. That's a good play too. So if you're looking for ways to fill out other slots in this deck, or you wanted to change things up a little bit, I'd say 2 and 2, 2 Thud, 2 Torgar, just so you have the chance of living the dream, but you still have cards that work with what we're trying to do in the deck. I think this one might be a good package to try out. Now here are your power rankings. Final score of 62. That's really not half bad for how much this deck costs. This thing's only like 75 bucks. Even with the lands and a couple of expensive cards like Angrath, it really doesn't add up to much. Less than 100 bucks is not a bad price for this thing that actually performs pretty well against some decks, especially mid-range decks we clean up against, We have plenty of time to execute our plan. They play big, fat, juicy creatures we want to steal, and bing bong. That's exactly what we want to run up against on the other side of the table. And from Golgari to even red-white mid-range decks, there's a fair share of mid-range decks we perform pretty well against in this format. Just our philosophy leads to naturally high defense scores and even resiliency scores. I mean, how many times this video did I say, oh, that's a big swingy play you can make in the late game? Yeah, we have a lot of those in this deck, and that actually leads to a fair resiliency score. And add to that we're actually a little bit more versatile than this deck usually gets to be, Usually this deck is just a bunch of active treasons or hijacks and costly plunders, It's like a bunch of cards that force you to steal a creature. That's all they do. Or they force you to sacrifice a creature, and that's all they do. We don't have to do that this time. We got Angrath, it does other stuff. Captivating Crew can at least attack if it's not stealing other stuff, so there's that, We've got sacrifice outlets that don't force us to sacrifice other creatures. Plaguecrafter can sacrifice itself. Vicious Offering can just kill a guy. So we've got a lot of play, a lot of versatility on both our sack outlets and our thief cards in this deck, and that leads to a pretty decent deck, all things considered. So if you wanted to give this thing a shot, I wouldn't blame you. It's probably like the best looking red-black steel sack deck in a while here, maybe ever. It's just got the best pieces that this deck could ever want. Red Wizards, again, has been fleshing out this concept in red and black for years now, but I think they're really pushing it with a couple of cards. People need to pay a little bit more attention because red, black, steel, and sack is actually a pretty freaking sweet deck right now against a couple of specific top-tier decks. So I hope you try it out. Like I said, it's only like 75 bucks right now on TCG Player. They help sponsor my content, yeah, so full disclosure on that, but they're also the cheapest place you're going to get this deck. So click the link in the description to go over there, sample their wares, and order any pieces you might need for a cheap and pretty effective deck. And while you're at it, make sure you subscribe to the content for more deck techs and other videos. I got a lot of cool stuff coming up in December here, a few things that I don't do very often, but I really, really want to do towards the end of the year. So look out, a lot of good content coming, including more decks and lists and stuff. So make sure you subbed, hit the bell to make sure that you get the functionality of being subbed. I hate how that works, but sub and hit the bell to make sure that you're actually notified when I put videos out. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTG, like the video if you enjoyed the content, and do all the other stuff, do the things. Go to the Patreon if you feel like it. If you got $1 in your pocket to help support the channel, that would be awesome, Dollar helps like crazy, and I'll let you vote in polls, see what videos you want to see next, and I'll let you know what videos we're doing 24 hours before I put them out. A lot of value for $1, so head on over there if you want to support the channel. I'd really, really appreciate it, but I'm pretty sure that I'm tapped out for this one, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place, and even though the subject matter of this deck is kind of trolly, I still want you to spread love and be kind. Thanks for watching, my wizards.